What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2007 W203 Mercedes-Benz C280. Today on the C280 behind me, we're going to be installing some Lemforder engine mounts along with a genuine transmission mount. All three of these are available on fcpeuro.com. This DIY is going to be applicable to not only the C280 behind me, but your 2004 and 2005 E320, your 2006 to 2009 E350, and your 2006 and 2007 C280 and C350s. Typically, as these engine mounts wear, they're going to cause the engine to sag down a little bit in your engine bay. You're going to want to do a visual inspection of them whenever you're underneath the vehicle, maybe when you're doing an oil change or something of that sort. As these get older, they're going to start to compress and they're going to start doing their job less and less, meaning that they're not going to absorb the engine vibrations as best as they can when they're new. One way to check your engine mounts is simply by putting the car in drive, 1 foot on the brake pedal, 1 foot on the accelerator pedal, and jab the throttle a couple times just to put some load on the drivetrain. If it starts moving around more than an inch or so in the engine bay, then that's a good telltale sign that they're bad. Along with that, the transmission mount can also cause some weird vibration and harshness in your driving. So keep that in mind whenever you're thinking about replacing your mounts. Now, before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this job, we're going to be using a long extension. I have a 3/8 drive extension for my 3/8 drive ratchet. I also have a 1/2 inch drive ratchet. I have two 16mm sockets, one for either ratchet. We have a 13 as well as an 8. Then we have a smaller extension with a 3/8 swivel. That'll come in handy when we're doing the top bolts on the engine mounts. We have a torque wrench. And then recommended is a piece of wood for either the screw jack, transmission jack, or floor jack you may be using to support the engine and transmission. A small magnet tool is always handy. A flashlight's always nice to have. And an electric impact tool always speeds things up. We will be using a screw jack today as we are working on the lift. Now with that covered, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. To get started under the hood of the W203, we're going to remove a couple things here so we can access the top half of our motor mounts. Starting with this front half of the beauty cover, simply reach underneath and pull up gently to release the tabs. You can just set this to the side. Now with that removed, we have two air duct pieces that we're going to want to pull off so we can have a better view of the top of the motor mounts. For this, you're simply going to want to pull towards you, and then you can release this portion of the ducting. We'll do the same thing on the driver's side bank, and we can set both of these to the side. Now, we'll have better access to the two 16mm bolts on top of our motor mounts. So let's start on the passenger side bank first. We'll grab a flashlight and we'll show you where we're working. Got my 16mm socket on a swivel extension. Then I have a 2-foot extension here so I can reach. It'll take a second to get it on here. All right, once we have our socket situated, we can break this bolt free. Here's where your magnet tool is going to come in handy to help fish things out, like the socket or any hardware. That bolt can stay in there for now. Now we'll head over to the driver's side bank and do the same thing. All right, same thing, 16mm socket, swivel extension with a long 2-foot 3/8 drive extension. All right, we'll grab our magnet tool. All right, now underneath the W203, we have 9 8mm bolts to remove that hold on the splash shield. 3 along the back, and then 2 more and 2 more up front. So let's go ahead and get started with that. I have an 8mm on my electric impact. We're missing one right here. We have 2 more by the front bumper. All right, and now we can go ahead and pull the shield off. Just be mindful there might be debris in here. You don't want it to fall on you or your eyes. And we can just go ahead and set this to the side. Now we have our splash shield removed. We have a better view at the bottom of our motor mount. So we're going to get our screw jack, get set up with that so we can support the motor, and then we'll get ready on removing the hardware from below. All right, now that we have our screw jack in place, we're going to be using a large piece of wood that spans the underneath of the oil pan to support everything. If you're doing this at home, on the ground, or in the driveway, you can use a floor jack, but most importantly, no matter what you're using, make sure you have a large object like this piece of wood to help support the engine as you raise it up. You don't want to pierce the oil pan by accidentally just jacking up in the middle of the pan. So, large piece of wood, screw jack, floor jack, whatever you have lying around, it's going to be the way to go. So now we can go ahead and just gently place the screw jack up against the oil pan, we'll simply take up some slack. We won't start lifting anything yet, and then we'll get ready to undo some hardware. That's going to be good there. We just have it nice and tensed up. Now we're going to move over to the passenger side bank first, and we'll get ready to tackle that 13mm bolt. Using a 13 with a small extension on my 3/8 drive ratchet, break that 13mm free. I can just zap it out the rest of the way. With that one situated, we can head over to the driver's side bank and do the same thing. So one thing to note on the driver's side bank, this is what happens when you mix New England with really bad motor mounts. Your bolt will literally just disappear, or what we assume is snap off. So in this case, the 13 is completely missing from this side bank. So at this point, all we have left to do is simply to continue raising up the motor just a bit. We'll pull up the 16s out from up top, and then we should be able to pull the motor mounts out. You want to note the orientation of how you pull them out so that you can install your new ones the same way. So I'm going to grab the new mounts, and then we'll go ahead and lift this up, and we'll swap one in at a time. All right, now at this point, we're going to go ahead and raise up the engine. I'll reach up top, and we'll remove the 16mm bolt and pull out our motor mount. You'll notice on the arm coming off the motor, there is an alignment notch cut out. That's going to be so that you can line up your motor mount when you reinstall it. And we'll show you that on the mount itself. All right, here's our old mount and our new one. You can see the new lamp folders come with a protective sleeve over them. You want to keep these on when you install them. Here's the old alignment dowel on the old motor mount, and our new one has the same one. It's just kind of covered a little bit by the protective sleeve. So when you reinstall this, you want to make sure that you put it in the same direction, and that locks in with the notch on the arm coming off the motor. So now it's just a matter of reinstalling this into position. We'll feed the 16mm bolt back up top and kind of get a hand started. And then we'll make sure that our bottom threaded bolt is lined up with the subframe so we can start our 13mm by hand as well. While everything is nice and loose still, I'll hand start both the 16 and the 13. And then we'll hand start the 13 on the bottom. And now that we have both of those hands started, we can go ahead and repeat the process on the passenger side. Then we'll lower everything back down and torque down our hardware. Now we're going to want to go ahead and torque both of these down to 35 Newton meters. So we'll grab our torque wrench and our 13mm socket, maybe with a small extension, and we'll go ahead and torque those both down. There's one. There's two. Now with those situated, we can go ahead and reinstall our splash shield. We'll tackle the 16s from up top. So we'll grab our 8mm socket, and we'll just go ahead and quickly reattach our splash shield. Make sure the front half of it feeds in kind of underneath the bumper. We'll get one or two started by hand. All right, now we have the splash shield situated. Before we head up top to button up those mounts, we're gonna go ahead and tackle the transmission mount as well. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, now back here, we're gonna go ahead and start by supporting our transmission before we disconnect anything. I'm using the same block of wood on the screw jack. Again, you can easily do this with a floor jack if you're working at home on the garage or in the driveway. This is a 4Matic vehicle, so we have the transfer case here that we're gonna kind of use to rest our wood on. You can also use a little bit of this exhaust bracket. Just be mindful not to bend it. Again, we're just gonna hold the weight. We're not looking to lift up the whole transmission. So we'll go ahead and set this up first. That'll be good right there for now. We have 5 16mm bolts to remove, as well as 2 16mm nuts. These are for the actual mount themselves that hold to this bracket. So we'll grab our 16mm socket and we'll work on zapping those off. It also helps to put some penetrating fluid on this if you have a rusty car like we do. This isn't terrible, but the hardware is a bit rusty, you know? Now we have 2 16mm nuts to tackle, which are holding the bracket onto the mount. So what happened here is our nut was so rusty that it just seized itself to the stud and came off with what was left of the stud. So that's okay, we'll get another nut. Now we have those 2 16mm nuts removed. There's one more sneaky 16 up here that I missed. It's kind of hidden in this V between the exhaust, the bracket, and this heat shield. So we'll go ahead and zap that off, and then this whole brace should come down. Now we have that off, we have access to our mount. You can see here's that broken stud that broke off. Again, no big deal, as it's going to be replaced when we put in a new mount. We'll just have to get a new nut. But we have 4 16mm bolts that hold our mount to the transmission. So we'll go ahead and zap those off quickly. Make sure you don't mix up your hardware for the mounts, as the bolts are a little bit different than the ones that hold the bracket up. They're same thread pitch and all that, but they're just a little bit longer compared to the ones that hold the brace. So now we have that up, we're going to clean up that bracket a little bit, and we'll get ready to reinstall our new fresh mount.
All right, now we have our old mount removed, so you can go ahead and install a new one. Go ahead and position it roughly into place, and we'll start threading in our 16mm bolts by hand. Once we have them all started, we can just snug them up with the electric ratchet, and then we'll go ahead and torque them down to 45 Newton meters. Now we can go ahead and take our brace and reinstall that. Again, we have a bunch of 16mm bolts and 2 16mm nuts. So we'll go ahead and get a couple of those hand started. We'll also hand start the 2 nuts, and then we're probably going to have to raise the transmission up a bit just because it was sagging so low before with the old sandwiched mount. So just keep that in mind. If your brace doesn't go flush against the body right away, it's just due to the fact that the old one was so wasted and the transmission was hanging down so much more. And we can start threading in a couple more by hand. Now that I have the bracket flush against the body of the car, we'll go ahead and snug the 5 16mm bolts down with the ratchet, and then we'll torque them down. And then similar to the mount, we're going to go ahead and torque these down to 50 Newton meters, so they're all kind of roughly in the same range. And we'll do 45 for the 2 studs coming off the mount. Don't forget about the sneaky 6 16mm. It tricked me on the way out, and it tricked me on the way in. Beautiful. With that situated, we can go ahead and lose this transmission jack or screw jack or floor jack, whatever it is that you're using. We'll go ahead and lower this. And now we can finally go ahead, get the car back on all 4 wheels, and we'll button up the engine mounts up front, get our beauty covers back on, and wrap up this DIY. Now that we're back on the ground, we're going to go ahead and tighten down the 2 16mm bolts that we have left. 1 on either engine mount. We're going to start on the driver's side bank. The torque spec for these are 50 Newton meters. There's 1. There we go. Now we have our motor mounts all buttoned up. We can go ahead and reinstall our ducting as well as our beauty cover. So just make sure you have the right duct for the right side, as they are a little bit different in length. The passenger side bank is a little bit longer than the driver's side. And then for the beauty cover, you just want to make sure you line up the dowels and the clips. You have 2 small dowels here and 2 small clips that go onto the top of the airbox, and a couple brackets, 1 off the oil cooler and 1 off of the front of the oil fill. There you have it, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Overall, pretty straightforward on the W203. Definitely a recommended service on these vehicles, as they cause a lot of problems as they age. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave them in the comment box below. And if there's any specific jobs you want to see be done on this vehicle, leave those in the comment section as well. And as always, if you like this DIY, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.